Okay, everyone, here we are going to start looking at our main macroeconomic model, our aggregate demand, aggregate supply model. Today, we are going to focus just on aggregate demand and what that is all about. So, firstly, aggregate, it's not a word that's used much in everyday English. Generally just means all added together. So, aggregate demand is all the demand in every market in an economy, right? So D plus D plus D plus D and so on. So one way of putting it is that it's the demand of everything by everyone. So who is everyone? However, that is consumers. So we have seen this when we looked at what economic growth was. So consumption, investment, government spending, net exports. So the demand of consumers, so households, demand of firms, they're the ones who do investment spending, demand of the government, and demand of foreigners who buy our exports. So here is our proper definition. Aggregate demand is the total demand for all goods and services produced in an economy by consumers, firms, government, and foreigners at different price levels. This is what it looks like. So you can see the similarities between this and our microeconomic model, right? So instead of price, we've got average price level. Instead of quantity, we've got real GDP. So there is an inverse relationship between the average price level and the total output demanded, right? This is our equation for aggregate demand. A change in one of these is going to shift the aggregate demand curve, right? So pretty simple. This is clearly an increase in aggregate demand. So it shifts the same way as it does in microeconomics. An increase in aggregate demand, and this is a decrease in aggregate demand. So I'm just going to make this a bit clearer for us. We have more total expenditure on goods and services at a given price level if aggregate demand is shifting to the right. If it's shifting to the left, what that means is we have less total expenditure on goods and services at a given price level. Okay, so these annotations on a diagram can be very useful. Let's look at what changes each of those C, I, G, X minus M, right? Firstly, what changes consumption? There are a few things. One is a change in consumer confidence. So that's a measure of the optimism of consumers about their future income and future economic conditions. So the sort of thing that an example of what could affect that is when we weren't sure what was happening in the pandemic. So here's a news article from SBS News at the time, a headline, will Australia be in lockdown for 6 months? You can imagine if people think there's a risk that we'll be in lockdown for 6 months, they're not going to be too confident spending their money. They're going to want to save money because they don't know if they're going to keep their job, right? Lockdowns affect people's jobs. So that could decrease consumer confidence. Changes in interest rates. So this is the first time we're mentioning interest rates, I think. Now, interest rates are the cost of borrowing money. So if interest rates increase, the big thing in Australia and in a lot of countries is mortgages. So when the Reserve Bank reduces interest rates, what it means is that we don't have to pay as much. Anyone with a mortgage does not have to pay as much interest each month to the bank. So 2016, the Reserve Bank slashed to a new record low of 1.5%. That meant that everyone with a mortgage suddenly didn't have to pay as much each month. So that was more money that they could spend on things like consumption. Households suddenly had more income in their hands, so they could spend more. Now, what's been happening the last couple of years is that the Reserve Bank has been raising interest rates. So August 2022, they'd raised for the 4th straight month. What that meant is that borrowing was more expensive. So anyone with a mortgage, myself included, we had to pay a bit more each month, which meant that we had less money to spend on consumption, right? So we didn't consume as much. So that decreased aggregate demand. Okay, change in wealth. Now this isn't income, it's change in wealth. So the types of things that can change wealth, house prices are a big one. That is where the majority of a lot of Australians' wealth is kept, in the value of their house. So when people see house sales around them and they see that their houses just like theirs are selling for twice what they did, say, 5 years ago, that makes them feel wealthier. When you feel wealthier, you spend more money. You spend like you're rich, right? Another way that people have increased their wealth, definitely not suggesting this as a strategy, is investing in things like Bitcoin or the share market. Bitcoin, so you can see what's happened to the price. It has gone crazy, and that's before it really went crazy. It's at 2,600. I think it's over 60,000 now. So people got wealthy. Even if they didn't sell it, they felt wealthy and they spent accordingly. Okay, the last one. Changes in income tax. So this guy here is Ronald Reagan. He was president of the United States. And when he was president, he reduced income tax in the US by a huge amount, largely to the richer people. So if the marginal propensity to tax decreases, what's going to happen to the marginal propensity to consume? It's going to increase, right? If you're less taxed, you've got more left to spend on consumption. If consumption increases, what's going to happen to aggregate demand? It will increase as well. Okay. Changes in business confidence. So we're now looking at things that affect investment spending. So business confidence, it's a measure of the optimism of firms about their future performance and future economic conditions. So it's just like consumer confidence. All right, so if businesses are more confident in their future, what they're going to do is they're going to spend on expanding their business. They're going to expend on complex machinery, expensive machinery. They're going to spend on infrastructure. They're going to spend on ways to expand their business so they can make more money. If they're confident, they might redo their office. They might expand their offices. They might set up a new plan, right? So any reason why they would be more confident, it could be that they see consumers are really confident. Consumers are going to keep buying. They could see the government are going to be quite friendly to business in their policies, things like that. Change in interest rates will affect investment as well, because a lot of investment spending is done through borrowing. So, these trucks, they cost a huge amount of money. Mining companies don't necessarily buy them with cash. They will borrow money to buy them. So decrease in interest rates makes borrowing for investment. Does it make it cheaper? Yes, it does. Therefore, more will be done. So decrease in interest rates, more investment. Increase in interest rates makes it more expensive, less will be done. Change in corporate or business tax. So that's a tax on business profits. Right? When we say corporate tax, that's what we mean. So when Trump was president, not sure how long this video is going to last. It might have been the first time he was president, or it might be the only time he was president. But when he was president, he cut business taxes or corporate tax from 35% of profit to 21%. Right? What that does, they suddenly have a lot more money left over to spend, right? So it makes investment more viable, right? You are not going to have to give as much of your return as profit. So it changes the equation. It makes it a lot easier to do. Government spending. What affects this? Any change in political priorities. So perhaps a change in government or a change in what they're going to do. That's obviously our Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. So governments, what they do is they make spending decisions. So they do it for political purposes and also economic purposes. There is a difference. So how much infrastructure they build, how much they spend on health and education, those decisions are based partly in politics. So what's going to keep them getting elected in the future? And then they have their economic priorities. Remember those macroeconomic objectives. They will change their level of spending to meet those objectives. Right, so 3 economic objectives. Hope you remember them. Economic growth, low and stable inflation, full employment. So if they want to decrease unemployment, what would they do? What are they going to do to government spending? Have a think. They're going to increase. Remember, if they're increasing government spending, they're spending more money, buying goods and services. People have to provide those goods and services. They have to be in jobs. Okay, what is going to change our level of net exports, our level of exports, and our level of imports? So one thing is going to be exchange rates. So exchange rates are the relative values of countries, of what you can exchange an Australian dollar for, how many US dollars will you get for it. That has changed quite a bit over time. 2011 was the peak of the value of the Australian dollar relative to the US dollar. So 1 Australian dollar could buy $1.10 US dollars, right? But as of 2023, 1 Australian dollar now only buys 63 US cents. That is quite a difference. So if you were to go to the US in 2011, you want to buy a hotel room that they're selling for $100. They're selling for $100 US. That would have cost $91. 2022, or I should say 2023, that's a typo, that would cost 159 Australian dollars. That is quite a big difference. So that's going to affect the cost of travel. And therefore, it's going to affect our decisions to do that spending. Okay. So a depreciation in a currency, that's when the value of the currency falls, that makes imports what? It makes them more expensive. So this hotel room that we're buying, that counts as an import because we're buying it from overseas. And it would make exports cheaper. So those same people coming to Australia, their hotel rooms that they buy in Australia would be a lot cheaper for them because the US dollar is now worth a lot more. Okay, changes in trade protection also count here. So Trump, again, when he was in power, he put on tariffs, so a tax on imports. And what that meant is that the US, they didn't buy as many imports anymore, right? If it cost 25% to buy Chinese steel, they were less likely to buy Chinese steel, more likely to buy their own. So increased taxes on imports, they will decrease imports and increase aggregate demand. Okay, when we explain a shift, always state which component of aggregate demand is causing the shift in aggregate demand. So if there was a stimulus, government spending $19 billion on school upgrades, something they did, the increased spending increases aggregate demand from AD to AD1, right? It's correct. It's not accurate though. A better response would be the $19 billion of government spending, a component of aggregate demand, saying that government spending is a component of aggregate demand, increases aggregate demand from AD to AD1. That is a better, more accurate response, and that is what we are looking for. Okay, and I've just got a summary table here of those shifts and what they're caused by, but that is all we have time for, so see you later.